Welcome to Liberty Action Alert with Greg Seltz, sponsored by our friends at the Lutheran Center for Religious Liberty here in Washington, D.C. A program that cuts through the chaos and confusion in the culture today by talking to kingdom citizenship, bold biblical principles for a robust public Christian life. And now your host, Dr. Greg Seltz.
Good day, Washington, D.C., and friends of the program all across the country. I'm Greg Seltz. Welcome to Liberty Action Alert. Today on our program, Alexandra Mcphee. She is the Director of Government Relations for Concerned Women of America, CWA, and they have been a tremendous voice on the Hill in so many ways, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But first of all, welcome, Alexandra.
Thank you for having me, Greg.
Okay, the reason why I wanted to have you on the program, and like we had talked about just in prep, is that our people, we have people listening all throughout the country, and I try to inform them about some of the issues that are going to be impacting our churches, our schools, our preschools, universities, and of course, the culture. And you made this presentation at one of the meetings that we were in together on the Hill, and it was about the ERA, the Equal Rights Amendment, and it's kind of coming back and what that's all about. So why don't you just talk us through that? Again, the concerns that you already see on the horizon with ERA.
The Equal Rights Amendment is an effort that began really around the same time as the suffrage movement. And it was one of several measures that were intended to bring more opportunities for women under the law than they enjoyed at the particular time when it was first considered as a proposal. The problem is it has unfortunately morphed into something much worse beyond what the purpose it was originally intended to serve. So in the 1970s, there was a revived effort, even from the early 1900s, to pursue an Equal Rights Amendment. And it got a lot of traction up until a woman named Phyllis Schlafly got involved. Right. And she made clear the consequences that could result from an Equal Rights Amendment in the Constitution. And the two that we're most concerned about at Concerned Women for America involve abortion and involve radical gender ideology. When it comes to abortion, the Equal Rights Amendment is considered by pro-abortion groups as well as pro-life groups to be a way for abortion to become part of the Constitution, to become a constitutional right. And the other is the gender ideology that I mentioned. The ERA makes no mention of women. It only uses the word sex. However, we have experienced in our culture a desire to change the meaning of male and female to include a spectrum of genders. So it is believed to be by supporters and opponents alike to be a way to codify that ideology as well into the Constitution.
Yeah, and I think people need to understand there's an egalitarian movement. And I think that's how I try to understand it. And that's why I think equality of access, that's a great thing. Equity, which is equality of outcomes, terrible thing. And the only way I think ERA, maybe correct me if I'm wrong, I think the ERA is really saying that men and women are not different. It finally comes down to this egalitarian notion that the only reason why men and women are different is because of these societal issues, that there's no real difference between men and women. And the Christian worldview has always said co-equality. We're equal under the law, but we're different. And so ERA, like you said, even with this radical gender ideology, is going to wipe out that notion that there's something unique called a woman and there's something unique called a man, and that we need to learn to appreciate each other even as we protect each other under the law. And I think that's going to be more destructive than people can imagine. Is that kind of what you're seeing in this law too?
Yes, and there are two ways, and I'll focus on where we see that. The first is how states have interpreted their own, state Supreme Courts have interpreted equal rights amendments in their own state constitutions. And the major cases are in New Mexico and Connecticut, in which those states determined that because the state healthcare program did not provide coverage for abortion, it was discrimination on the basis of sex, because men can't have abortions. and well, rather, it was men can have all medically necessary services covered under the state medical program.
I got it.
Women cannot have abortions medically necessary, but women cannot have abortion coverage under current provisions and policies in the particular states. So that setup is unconstitutional under our state constitution because it treats men and women differently, because men have access to all the medically necessary services they need, women do not. So it's a conflation of the medical necessity of abortion, which of course is not true, except in the very rare and tragic instance of the life of the mother being at risk. And B, the problem is that it speaks to this equity concept that you mentioned, right. Equal outcomes, not equality.
Well, and let me just jump in on that, because Jordan Peterson, we follow him on a lot of these kind of public issues, and he talked about how this notion of egalitarianism was thought to be that if everyone had the exact same choices, that everyone would come out, proportionately the exact same way. What actually happens is if you give men and women choices, in an egalitarian sense societally, they actually turn out, it maximizes the differences of men and women. And they found out that men gravitate more to these kind of things and women gravitate more to these kind of things. And it blew the minds of these social engineers, because they thought, again, that there weren't these biological differences. And you're saying this would actually force us by law to become egalitarian, which is not what we want.
Right. And on that point, the another topic mentioned by proponents is the idea of the gap in wages earned by men and women.
Right.
And they use that as a justification for the Equal Rights Amendment, as if there aren't already protections in law on basically getting your due for the services you provide. There are. And they say, well, we want to constitutionalize. Well, fine. The problem is, the Equal Rights Amendment is written in a way that covers much more than just that very unique and provision that does not circumstance that probably isn't appropriate to address through a constitutional amendment. And for another...
Yeah, but it also treats that aggregate number as if it's a fact on a particular issue. And when you actually start to dig down into the data, you find that men and, again, I always tell people, folks, use your sanctified common sense. If I can hire somebody for 75 cents on a dollar and I'm making and my ability to make money is at like 1 or 2% over the costs, you think I'm going to hire men? I'm going to hire capable women if that is actually true. But when you dig down, it's more about the choices, the careers, the hours of work, and all that kind of stuff. And you regularize those things, and you don't see that gap at all. And
it's a great point that you make, and one that proponents always skate over whenever they bring up the equal pay argument in particular, because women want to be with their children when they have children, and that's okay. And one very insightful comment that a witness made once before a congressional hearing about the Equal Rights Amendment was the fact that why is it a problem if women want to stay home with their children and make different choices? And why is the 9 to 5, 8 to 6 schedule for 5 days a week a good standard?
Yeah, especially when
itself, and it's not.
Especially when our kids, again, one of the things that I used to do, because we had ministries in New York City when I was a younger pastor and in the city, and we used to tell these guys, don't sacrifice your family for your career. I mean, so that was like a unique male problem. These guys were hard drivers. They wanted to work 80 hours a week and make all this money, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And we kept saying, man, you got to provide for your family. But man, if you do this, you could destroy everything. So we were counseling them against such nonsense. And now here comes the women's movement saying, why don't you both be just as foolish?
Right. And it's really unfortunate. But these are the two ways in which the Equal Rights Amendment would pursues this equity notion rather than equality.
It seems like it's also, because it oftentimes is proposed as this is good for women, but it's good for one particular kind of woman. So it's like saying if you're a woman who wants this, then the ERA is great for you. But it kind of eliminates a whole host of women who say, well, that's not really what we want. And sometimes it's presented as all women want this. So this is even bad for women. not just bad for society, correct?
Oh, sure. And frankly, there's just a fundamental misunderstanding of the role of government through something like the Equal Rights Amendment, because it's the way advocates have championed it. It's about giving you this, giving you that, giving you all these things from the government, when really the government is supposed to, the guarantees that we have are about government not interfering in our lives, not government guaranteeing something for us. It's negative promises, not positive in the logical sense. So it is incongruent, just constitutionally speaking, as well as far as political philosophy.
Yeah, we wrote a little piece, a little op-ed on our website called "It's Terrible When the Referees Play the Game." And it's kind of the same thing you just talked about. This is, I mean, whatever your ideas of what women should want and women should have and all these kind of things, the worst guarantor of that is a government that starts to guarantee some women this, other women not that, and men, other things. They're supposed to be the referees. They're supposed to call balls and strikes, and it's supposed to be fair for everybody. And living life is supposed to be what we do with those freedoms in service to our neighbor. And like you just said, when government starts playing the game, it's like when a referee starts calling fouls every 30 seconds. You hate playing that game and you don't want to watch it, right?
And that's exactly what we would see. And it'd be more than just and frankly, it would be an issue that devolves to the courts, because the language is broad, which sometimes is appropriate, but in this case would be an opportunity for abuse, given what we've seen in states like Connecticut and New Mexico, as I mentioned earlier. And it would be up to the individual judge, the individual federal circuit, Supreme Court. And we've already seen the mess that makes, and it's not worth going back to that again for the sake of a euphemistically named amendment.
Yeah, I like how you just said the euphemistically named amendment. And this is what our people need to understand. A lot of these things, like even the Respect for Marriage Act that we just saw on the Hill, it was anything but the respect for traditional marriage and the institution of marriage. And same thing with like ERA. Who can be against it? It's like saying clean air. Well, you start to say, well, we're all for these kinds of things. The question is, what's the government's role in these things? What's freedom's role in these things? What's choice's role? And then what's virtue? What's the virtuous way to deal with these things? That's a whole nother dimension that we never talk about today. And that's really supposed to be for the churches and people in society to figure that out. Let me just step back for just a second and just say, folks, if you want more information on this, concernedwomen.org, and there's more information about what we're talking about. But if you'd also like to have more resources about, well, why isn't this a government issue? I mean, what's a good role of government, the good role of the church and the state, those kind of things. That's Lutheran Center for Religious Liberty. That's lcrlfreedom.org. That's lcrlfreedom.org. And there you're going to find, especially under the resources button, you're going to find all kinds of information, resources that talk about the role of church, the role of state on, especially when it comes to a lot of these issues. Okay, back to our discussion about the new ERA with our guest, Alexandra Mcphee from Concerned Women for America. So is it because of the abortion stuff? Is that kind of what do you think the impetus of why this is being brought back?
It's an issue that for some reason it won't be let go. And I don't think it's primarily motivated by the abortion issue, although historically, I'll say.
Okay, right.
For a while, supporters denied that there was any connection to abortion and denied that there would be any consequence for abortion coverage or access. And the recent development is the vocal support by advocates like Planned Parenthood and by NARAL, as well as advocates for really inserting gender ideology into federal law. If you look at the supporters for the Equal Rights Amendment, you'll notice a lot of League of Women voter constituencies and other, I would say, late 20th century women's groups who just have a different understanding of the role of government and the role of women. And it's one that it's not appropriate to pursue through a constitutional amendment. And they're the ones who champion the equal pay argument, the access to jobs, etc. And that's well and good, but it's not going to turn out the way they want it to because of the power it gives to the judiciary, because of the fact that you have so many dogs in the fight for abortion and for gender ideology becoming a constitutional right.
And they start to change language, folks. And when they start changing the language, you can't let them do that, because then they win the argument because you're arguing on their terms. And when you can say something like pregnancy is now a disease, treated for pregnancy. Mm-hmm. Who would have ever talked like that 40, 50 years ago? Pregnancy was like, wow. And even if it was an unplanned pregnancy, as they talk about that, even that was something like, yeah, but this is still an opportunity where we can show our humanity to one another. Now they talk about you should have the right to treat the disease of pregnancy. Well, now children, I don't care when the child's born, you think they're going to change their view of the child just because they're born? If you start to denigrate human beings, Francis Schaeffer used to say, if you can classify any innocent life as not worth living, you're going to see man's inhumanity to man like you've never seen it before. And I think that's the kind of stuff that you're pointing out in these amendment pushes. You're saying it sounds good, but dig down onto this and see it's really a war against women. It's a war against the family. It's a war against children. We can be better human beings than this, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And the dialogue really has just escalated as far as the attack on the identity of the idea of woman itself, on the sanctity of life. And we've seen that in congressional hearings that have taken place over the past few years, really around the 2018-2019 mark. And more recently, there was a Senate Judiciary Committee hearing in the Congress this past February.
Right.
And Concerned Women for America, the organization I work for, hosted a press conference in opposition to the Equal Rights Amendment. In addition to Phyllis Schlafly, who created the Eagle Forum, and really led the opposition to the Equal Rights Amendment, Concerned Women for America was started in order to respond to the supporters for the Equal Rights Amendment, to make the point that they do not speak for all women. Right. And it was started by a woman named Miss Beverly LaHaye. She was a pastor's wife from California. She's still alive today and 94 years old, and just really an inspiration. She started Concerned Women for America in response to the Equal Rights Amendment. So it was us, Independent Women's Forum, a newer group that is a pro-woman in so many ways, and is not faith-based, and does not take a position on abortion, but is very much like-minded on this issue of the identity of women, the dignity of women. Right. We also had a number of other groups, Family Research Council, Susan B. Anthony, and what we were doing was speaking out against the Equal Rights Amendment to share our concerns. And Representative Mary Miller of Illinois joined us and really has been a leader in the space of defending women. We also saw during the Senate Judiciary Committee hearing comments by Senator Cindy Hyde-Smith of Mississippi, who we work with often. She is a woman of deep faith. She still attends her home church back in Mississippi, and she is a champion for the really just people who have faith and are desperate for that kind of representation in Congress. And that's the kind of woman she is. So she spoke against this, as well as the many procedural defects with the Equal Rights Amendment, which I didn't bring up before because I'm confident that supporters will pursue a procedurally sound Equal Rights Amendment at one point. But there are many issues with it there as well.
Well, it's funny. My wife, Marie Hernandez Seltz, who I always say the conservative women, whether it's conservative Black women, conservative Hispanic women, conservative Anglo women, whatever. We really believe in strong women in culture, but that encompasses moms and families too. And Concerned Women for America has been a really great resource for her, too. She's been involved in that. And that's how I got connected to you all. And I actually loved what your organization did, not just like in this, but also with the Gorsuch hearings and things like that. When you started to see women coming out and saying he's anti-woman when he was anything but that. And these judges who are actually pro-family, pro-woman, pro-life, man, you can't be any more pro-woman than that. So again, without you standing up for him, I don't think he gets I think he backs away from the nomination. And so again, kudos to the organization for strong women standing up, because I've seen your voice at work on the Hill.
Well, you're so gracious to bring that up, because Concerned Women for America is a grassroots organization, and we were involved with the confirmations of Justices Gorsuch and Kavanaugh and Barrett, and Sheldon.
Well, actually, it was Kavanaugh. I think I'm wrong. It was the Kavanaugh hearings. I'm sorry. Right. I was thinking of Gorsuch.
We were involved with Mr. Gorsuch's nomination fight. So There's a senator from Rhode Island who sits on the Senate Judiciary Committee, and he often talks about right-wing dark money. And say what he will about his vast conspiracy. It exists in equal gravity on the left, but at any rate, the fact of the matter is there's just grassroots support for this pro-family policy, for a judiciary that is adherent to the Constitution and not to their personal policy preferences. So we were able to really all we do is serve as a conduit for the passion of the grassroots and channel that towards important decisions like Supreme Court nominations, like opposition to the Equal Rights Amendment, like the press conference we had in late February when there was that Equal Rights Amendment hearing. Now, we don't expect it to come up for a few weeks in the Senate, where it's most likely to receive consideration, but we do expect it to come up. Senator Schumer made a promise to advocates for that to happen, and he said before April, but realistically, it may be later on in the spring, although we're always vigilant. Advocates are also pursuing a strategy in the U.S. House of Representatives to not pass any new law or measure, but certainly to elevate the profile of the Equal Rights Amendment, which we would oppose. It's a procedural measure known as a discharge petition, and that's a bit in the weeds. But the point is, there will be a push. There continues to be a push in both chambers, and at the state level, there are certain states that have recently ratified, quote unquote, the Equal Rights Amendment for various procedural reasons. We disagree with that. But those states are Virginia, Illinois, Nevada. There will continue to be a push, we expect. So I would not be surprised if your listeners do hear about that, regardless of whether their state has been involved early in the 70s or more recently today. It's still a topic that many legislators use to push a left, philosophically left platform.
Yeah, I call it secular Puritanism, secular pietist. It's not even liberal versus conservative. It's leftist and anti. And so again, folks, you need to be aware of what all this is about. And one of the hard things about our position is that we talk about equal access, getting everybody to the same starting line. And so someone will say, well, if you don't believe in the ERA, what's your policy? And the policy is your freedom. It doesn't sound as sexy to say your freedom. You can do what, you've been gifted and empowered to do. Well, what's the government program to do that? Well, no, you don't want a government program to do that. It'll destroy your freedom. It'll destroy these wonderful things. So sometimes it sounds like we're just against things. No, we're for you. And I think that's the positive way to go forward on this. Where can they go for more information on this, Alexandra?
Well, you can go to concernedwomen.org to learn about our involvement in the issue. And as I mentioned, there are other groups who are leading this, like Eagle Forum, Independent Women's Forum, Family Research Council, Susan B. Anthony, Students for Life. All of these groups are very much involved. And of course,
Lutheran Center for Religious Liberty is with you, so you can put us on that list.
That's right. Yeah. And Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission too. There are several faiths, several denominations that have concerns about this, and we are certainly not alone, and neither are you if you ever have to take a stand against this.
Well, folks, this is what we do on the Hill. We gather with people on other organizations like CWA and all the folks that focus on the family and the guys that we work with all the time. But I want you to know that all of us together are fighting for your fundamental rights of life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. Why? So that you can live virtuous lives without government coercion. And that's really the end goal of this. Alexandra, thank you so much for taking time to share with us what's coming with this and how we can be a part of the way forward through it.
Thank you, Greg.
For more information about her work, that's concernedwomen.org. Thanks for tuning in today. To get to know our LCRL-DC work better, check out our website at lcrlfreedom.org. Contained there are resources to empower your public square dynamic discipleship. Or check out our weekly Word from the Center opinion piece every Friday at facebook.com/LCRL Freedom. Till next time, God bless you always. I'm Greg Seltz. Have a great week.
You've been listening to Liberty Action Alert with Greg Seltz. Executive Director of the Lutheran Center for Religious Liberty in Washington, D.C. This program has been brought to you by the Lutheran Center for Religious Liberty.